States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo, for your briefing, and I welcome the participation of the Secretary of State of Poland. On September 10th, Russian military drones violated the airspace of Poland, a NATO member. The United States stands by our NATO allies in the face of these alarming airspace violations. The United States is consulting with Poland and our other NATO allies under Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty. And rest assured, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. This incident does not help the extraordinary efforts that the United States has undertaken in recent weeks to broker an end to the war. Since the Alaska summit between President Trump and President Putin on August 15th, Russia has intensified its bombing campaign against Ukraine, resulting in loss of life and damage to civilian infrastructure. These actions, now with the addition of violating the airspace of a U.S. ally, intentionally or otherwise, show immense disrespect for good faith U.S. efforts to bring an end to this conflict. We urge Russia to renew and live up to its commitment to diplomacy by seeking an immediate end to hostilities through direct negotiations with Ukraine. Colleagues, the Russia-Ukraine war needs to end. We cannot risk it escalating into a broader conflict. Russia must demonstrate its seriousness by taking immediate, concrete steps toward peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank USG DiCarlo for her comprehensive briefing on developments unfolding in the Eastern European region. The situation continues to be a great concern and carries serious implications for regional stability and international norms. The significant divergence in narratives underscores the urgency of the situation and the critical need for diplomacy and dialogue. The protection of civilian life and critical infrastructure must remain a paramount concern. Such incidents highlight the fragility and volatility in the region. They remind us of the fundamental principle enshrined in the international law and the United Nations Charter. We firmly maintain that there is no military solution to the ongoing war in the region. Continued escalations only serve to heighten tensions and undermine the prospects for durable peace. We believe that lasting solutions are found at the negotiating table, not through acts that can be interpreted as hostile. In this regard, we call upon all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to engage in earnest, substantive dialogue. A durable resolution will require a genuine commitment to de-escalation, confidence-building measures, and renewed focus on diplomatic efforts. To conclude, Mr. President, my delegation reaffirms its unwavering support for all efforts aimed at upholding the principles of international law and achieving just and lasting solution consistent with the United Nations Charter. The people in the region deserve a future defined by peace, security, and stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Mr. President, Today, the members of the Security Council have been proposed to discuss an incident on Polish soil which took place on the evening of 9 to 10 September. According to the reports from the Polish Operational Command, in the airspace of that state, more than a dozen unmanned aerial vehicles entered that airspace. It has been announced that part of them have been neutralized by air defense systems. A home in Lublinsk region was damaged, and there were no casualties. Warsaw recognized that the drones could have flown in from the territory of Ukraine. At the same time, Poland they hastily pinned blame on Russia without presenting any evidence whatsoever. We think it is important to analyze the real magnitude of the consequences of the incident and to compare this with the political clickbait which is being advanced by Polish and other European politicians, as well as to pose additional questions about the versions that have been circulating about what transpired. On the 10th of September, Warsaw published data about fragments of drones that fell, and specifically a photograph was demonstrated of a roof of a home that had been damaged. However, any military expert will confirm that if this indeed was an explosion of a drone warhead weighing tens of kilograms, the consequences would have been different. Here, what took place was a localized damage, more likely a consequence of falling wreckage. Furthermore, later, the Polish authorities were indeed compelled to acknowledge that they did not find drone warheads on their territory. Equally telling is another incident with a device that was found in an agricultural field. Apparently, it simply veered off course and fell, and this indeed could have been the consequence of a technical malfunction or the result of the use of Ukrainian radio-electronic warfare means. Now, turning to actions by the Russian Federation. On the 10th of September, that evening, the Russian armed forces carried out long-range, land-based, sea-based, and air-based high-precision weapon strikes, as well as drone strikes targeting military-industrial facilities on the territory of Ukraine, where there was manufacturing and maintenance facilities for armored and aviation equipment of the UAF, as well as engines and electronic parts for this. There were no targets marked on Polish territory. The maximum range of the drones used in this strike did not exceed 700 kilometers, which makes it physically impossible for them to have reached Polish territory. Despite the obvious baselessness of the allegations levied against us, in order to provide for comprehensive and objective elucidation of what took place, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation expressed a willingness to engage in professional dialogue and consultations with the Ministry of Defense of Poland. The Russian Foreign Ministry, in turn, also stands ready to engage in this work if the Polish side indeed is interested in reducing tensions rather than fomenting tensions. We call upon Polish colleagues to take advantage of these proposals rather than engaging in megaphone diplomacy at multilateral platforms. We have already repeatedly stated that we are not interested in escalating tensions with Warsaw, and we repeat that today. What warrants separate mention is a constructive and responsible approach of the Belarusian side in the context of what transpired. The relevant organs of the Republic of Belarus, through the relevant mechanisms, promptly informed Polish colleagues about existing risks, having demonstrated a responsible approach and a willingness to engage in cooperation. This is a policy which is based on exchange of objective information, coordination of action, and it should serve as an example for a good faith conduct amid such incidents. Mr. President, unfortunately, the reaction to the incident in Polish and European political establishment and media outlets gives rise, under these circumstances, to significant questions. The head of EU diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, without having awaited official conclusions, rushed to make loud statements about the alleged deliberate violation of Polish airspace, advancing her favorite talking point about investments in European defense, that is, continuation of the militarization thereof. hysterical outbursts about the alleged aggression from the Russian Federation is also heard from other European capitals. This is all very similar to the information campaign, the goal of which is to maintain the level of external mobilization around Ukraine and to continue to egg on allies to continue to provide new and new weapons. In this vein, we would be well advised to recall the incident which occurred in Przewód in November 2022, when, as a result of the fall of a missile, 2 Polish citizens died. At that point, tensions were also being ignited. However, 1 year later, the General Prosecutor and Minister of Justice Zbigniew Zerbo recognized that both the launch location and the ownership of the missile were Ukrainian. And the former president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, in an interview with the journalist Bogdan Romanowski, recently explicitly recognized that at that point the Kiev regime was attempting to pressure Warsaw to levy accusations against Russia. According to him, this was a deliberate attempt to draw Poland and consequently NATO into an armed conflict. This candid comment from the Polish politician is an important recognition, which is not being quoted by European newspapers nor discussed it in national parliaments, but we think it is important today to remind you of this. We are talking about a desire of Kiev to at all costs engage in the confrontation with Russia. More and more states. It is no secret that Ukraine has long been consistently attempting to expand the geography of the conflict with no regard for the consequences of such an escalation. The Polish authorities, for all of these years, in an anti-Russian frenzy, were willing to support any, regardless of how criminal, regardless of how reckless, any actions of the Kiev regime, and were eagerly indulging it, hoping to harm the Russian Federation using its hands. Unfortunately, the Polish authorities are not drawing any conclusions, and they're continuing to engage in a policy of escalation in Europe. For example, at the pretext of conducting a joint Russian-Belarusian exercises, the West Zapad 2025, the Polish authorities already announced the closure of the border with Belarus, and they announced the intention to deploy to that area up to 40,000 military personnel. Let us recall that our above-mentioned strategic exercises are defensive in nature. They do not pose any threat for any neighboring country. And the representatives of OSCE countries, including Poland, have been invited to observe them. However, the decision was taken, the border is closed, and the victims of this decision are ordinary citizens whose freedom of movement has been denied. In any conflict, when we are talking about provocations, the key question remains unchanged. Who does this benefit? The response here is obvious. All of this artificially blown up hysteria is beneficial exclusively to the head of the Kiev regime and the European Party of War, who are desperately trying to derail prospects for Ukrainian resolution, which began to take shape as a result of the Russian-US contacts in August. It is evident that Zelensky is now the main opponent to a political resolution of the Ukrainian crisis, which will uncover his illegitimacy. Without the conflict, the justification for the legal vacuum will disappear. This justification, which he is using to cling to power in circumvention of constitutional procedures, even according to the data of Ukrainian sociological centers, Zelensky's ratings are falling precipitously, as is the level of trust in him. In this context, the unabated military actions, hostilities, are a tool for political survival of the Ukrainian regime. Against the backdrop of this, what is becoming clear is the level of despair prompting the Kiev authorities to throw remnants of the people forcibly mobilized into battle, or more accurately, to slaughter, despite the colossal losses and skyrocketing desertion rates. Official data for 2025 shows that more than 140,000 criminal cases have been initiated for soldiers who abandoned their units. The overall figures for desertion since the start of the conflict are nearing 266,000 people. The effective stabbing levels in combat units at 50% is viewed as a success, and the real losses exceeding 15 to 20,000 people per month has long ago outstripped the pace of mobilization. People no longer wish to die for a corrupt leadership which long ago has ceased to represent the interests of society. The head of the UAF, Syrski, recently recognized that Russia has a threefold advantage in manpower and capabilities, and in the main areas has a 4 to 6-fold advantage. This is a frank recognition of failure and essentially an indictment of the current military political policy. And this is precisely why Zelensky today is willing to do anything at all to maintain this conflict in the active phase, even if this may give rise to threats, if this means simulating threats, exaggerating consequences, or, as was the case in Przewod, manipulating any incident in order to drag NATO countries into the war. What is noteworthy is how easily the head of the Kiev regime recants his own loud statements as soon as they no longer advance his political interests. In recent months, he invoked slogans about the supposed intention to engage in dialogue. However, the direct, unambiguous proposal from the Russian president to visit our capital to discuss the whole gamut of issues related to Ukrainian resolution was rejected by him under the pretext of the inadmissibility and the inability to travel, quote, while his country is under attack. And yet, as we see, there have been no attacks which prevented him from trekking to European capitals for 3+ years and making demands for more weapons deliveries and increased military assistance. Because in those capitals, the discussion is about continuing the war and this is completely in line with his interests. As soon as a real opportunity for peace emerged, with a visit to with a White House leader taking office who is willing to deal with the root causes of a crisis and to seek a lasting solution, Zelensky immediately began to renounce the previously announced peace initiative. This merely bears out what we were pointing to from the very start. The Kiev regime never had any intention to embrace peace, and everything that the regime is doing is to prolong the conflict, to cling to power, and to continue to take advantage of his Western sponsors. Weapons deliveries, sanctions misadventures, and Brussels propagandistic hysteria do not bring peace any closer, but rather entrenches the illusion in Kiev that they will manage to change the reality. However, it is not possible to change the reality. Every new month of hostilities merely brings the regime closer to collapse and raises the cost of resolution. The Russian Federation remains wedded to a responsible approach. We are open to constructive cooperation with everybody who genuinely is focused on de-escalation and establishment of peace in Europe, not pursuing the conflict for the sake of parochial political advantages. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing and take note of her remarks. We welcome the presence of Poland's Secretary of State in this meeting. Mr. President, merely a glance at both the contemporary as well as past history is enough to draw a fundamental conclusion about conflicts. Conflicts, especially those continuing for a longer duration, have a greater risk of degenerating into wider conflagration. Given the interconnected nature of our world, the negative externalities from a localized conflict can have far-reaching consequences, impacting not only the regional, but also global security and stability. Mr. President, alongside many of our fellow council members, Pakistan has repeatedly drawn attention to the negative repercussions that the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has had, far beyond its geographical expanse. We have therefore called for the need to bring an end to this conflict. We take note of Poland's letter of 10th September addressed to this council, reporting violations of its airspace. Pakistan is an ardent proponent and adherent of the UN Charter and the principles contained therein. We firmly hold that sovereignty and territorial integrity of all member states is sacrosanct and must be respected. Mr. President, Pakistan remains deeply concerned by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the humanitarian tragedy unfolding as a result of it. We have consistently said, and repeat once again, military solutions are counterproductive and serve only to sow seeds for future conflicts. We are dismayed by the recent escalation in fighting and note with deep regret that diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict have, thus far, remained inconclusive and without meaningful progress. Mr. President, Pakistan's position from the very outset has been clear and consistent. We have always called upon the parties to demonstrate restraint, scrupulously adhere to the international humanitarian law, make meaningful strides towards de-escalation, and give primacy to dialogue and diplomacy. We firmly believe that only a sincere and meaningful dialogue which addresses security concerns of all sides is anchored in the principles of UN Charter and international law and respects the relevant multilateral agreements can help secure peace, which is both just and enduring. Pakistan stands ready to support all regional and international efforts that pave the way for a peaceful resolution of this conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank USG DiCarlo for her briefing. We welcome the participation of the Secretary of State of Poland in this meeting. Since the onset of this conflict, Sierra Leone has joined the international community in calling for its end, urging the parties to embrace diplomatic negotiations towards a ceasefire that prevents further death and suffering. The conflict has already taken tens of thousands of lives, caused mass displacement, and deprived millions of basic needs. Its destabilizing impact has been felt not only in Europe, but across the world. The recent reports of Russian drones entering airspace of Poland mark an alarming escalation. According to the letter from Poland's permanent representative, 19 drones launched from Russia and Belarusian territory violated Poland's airspace between 9th and 10th September, described rightly by Poland as an unprecedented violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. We note that in response, Poland invoked NATO's Article 4 and imposed new restrictions, including border closures with Belarus and the deployment of troops along its eastern flank. We also note that other states in the region have followed with airspace restrictions and heightened security measures. These actions underscore the gravity of the threat